My father slid a check for $300,000 across the table to my sister, Chloe, with a smile that said she was his future, while he handed me a dusty wooden box of old photos, as if I were a charity case. The weight of that box felt like a burial for my place in this family, a heavy, silent verdict that I was the child who didn't need saving and therefore didn't need love. I stood there in my childhood dining room, watching my mother hug Chloe like she'd won the lottery, while I was left holding a pile of fading memories that they thought were worthless. They didn't realize that in their haste to get rid of me, they had handed me the only thing in that house that actually mattered. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about what happens when the strong child finally stops carrying the weight of a family that never deserved her. Before we dive deep into the wreckage of my family's choices, I want to pause and hear from you. Where are you watching this from right now, and what time is it there? I truly love hearing who is connected with me and sharing these moments across the world. Knowing that there are people out there who understand the quiet sting of being overlooked makes this easier to share. My name is Madison. I am 32 years old, and for most of my life, I lived in the shadow of a golden child who never had to earn a single thing. I was the one who worked the double shifts, the one who handled the emergencies, and the one who never asked for a dime. Because I learned early that asking was the fastest way to feel invisible. While my sister was being treated like a porcelain vase, I was treated like a cast iron skillet. One gets a glass case, and the other gets thrown in the drawer to do the heavy lifting. Welcome back to our channel, the place where we share stories about family betrayal, hard boundaries, and finding your voice when the people who should love you the most try to tear you down. If you are new here, I invite you to join our community. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you do not miss a single chapter of how this box changed my life forever. Trust me, the thing my parents needed from me at the end, they never saw it coming. For 32 years, I played my part. I was the strong one, the reliable daughter who lived 2 blocks away and walked over during her lunch break to check on them. But on that Tuesday night in Portland, the script changed. My parents didn't just give me a box. They gave me my exit papers. And for the first time, I was more than happy to sign them. The rain in Portland doesn't just fall. It clings to everything like a cold, damp reminder of the things you're trying to forget. That Tuesday night, the sky was a bruised purple, and the wind was whipping the branches of the old oak tree against the dining room window, a rhythmic, scratching sound that set my teeth on edge. My parents, Thomas and Martha, had called a mandatory family meeting. In our house, that usually meant one of 2 things. Either Chloe had gotten into another expensive mess that needed cleaning up, or my parents wanted to brag about a new plan they had for their golden child. I arrived early, as I always did. I had spent my lunch break running errands for my mother, picking up her heart medication and a specific type of organic tea she insisted she couldn't live without. I didn't mind. I was the reliable one. I was the daughter who lived 20 minutes away, the one who knew the code to their security system and the name of their plumber. I walked into the kitchen, the air thick with the smell of my mother's signature pot roast, the kind she only made when there was something to celebrate. "Madison, you're here," my mother said, barely looking up from the stove. She didn't ask how my day at the architectural firm had been. She didn't notice the wet patches on my coat. "Set the table, would you? And use the good linen. Chloe will be here any minute." Chloe, my younger sister by 4 years. If I was the cast iron skillet of the family, durable, seasoned by fire, and expected to do the heavy lifting, Chloe was the porcelain vase. She was delicate, she was sensitive, and she was perpetually in need of a cushion. She arrived 10 minutes late, the headlights of her glacier-white Audi, a car our parents had helped her lease despite her mounting credit card debt, sweeping across the wet driveway. She walked in smelling of expensive perfume and entitlement. "Sorry I'm late," she chirped, tossing her keys onto the mahogany table, the table my father had spent months refinishing, a piece of furniture that was supposed to be a family heirloom. Traffic was a nightmare, and I had to stop for a quick touch-up. You know how it is. I looked at my father, Thomas. He was an engineer by trade, a man who lived his life by blueprints and formulas. He alphabetized his tools and believed that every problem had a logical solution. But when it came to Chloe, his logic always seemed to short-circuit. He pulled out her chair as if she were royalty, his face lighting up with a pride he never quite managed to muster for my promotions or my hard-earned accomplishments. "Now that we're all here, my father started, his voice taking on that formal, official tone he used when he was about to deliver a verdict. He sat at the head of the table, his hands folded neatly on the placemat. Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future. We aren't getting any younger, and we wanted to make sure our legacy is handled correctly while we're still here to see it. He reached into the breast pocket of his blazer and pulled out a long, white envelope. He slid it across the mahogany surface toward Chloe. I watched her fingers, manicured to perfection, reach out and snatch it. Chloe, my father said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. We know you've had a few setbacks with your boutique and your influencer brand. We know the world hasn't always been kind to your dreams. This is a gift from us, a $300,000 check. It's your safety net. Use it to build the life we know you're capable of. The room went silent, save for the sound of the rain. $300,000. That was their entire savings, the bulk of the equity they had left in the house. Chloe gasped, a rehearsed sound of surprise, and threw her arms around our father's neck. Oh, Daddy, thank you. I can finally move to that studio in the Pearl District. I can finally hire a real manager. I sat there, my hands flat on the table, feeling the coldness of the wood beneath my palms. I wasn't waiting for a check. I didn't need their money to survive. I had built my own life through 80-hour weeks and a mountain of student loans. But I was waiting for something, a recognition, a thank you, for the years I had spent being their personal assistant, their emergency contact, their rock. My father turned to me then. His expression shifted. The warmth he had for Chloe disappeared, replaced by a sort of clinical detachment. He reached under his chair and pulled out a box. It wasn't a gift-wrapped box. It was a dusty, heavy wooden chest with brass hinges that had long since tarnished. He set it in front of my plate with a dull thud. And for you, Madison, he said, we're giving you this. It's the family archives. Photos of your grandfather, Silas, and his life before the war. Documents, letters, old memories. I looked at the box. There was a layer of dust on the lid that stuck to my fingertips. Photos? I whispered. Madison, don't look at us like that, my mother said, her voice sharp as she began carving the roast. You've always been the strong one. You're independent. You have a career. You don't need a cushion like your sister does. You land on your feet, no matter what. Giving you money would be like giving a fish a glass of water. It's redundant. So, Chloe gets the future and I get the past? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. You get the legacy, my father corrected me, as if he were explaining a complex diagram to a child. Those photos are priceless in a way money isn't. They represent where we came from. We trust you to keep them safe because you're the only one responsible enough to do it. It was the ultimate trap. They were using my own strength as a weapon against me. Because I didn't need them, they felt justified in giving me nothing. It was the same logic they had used my whole life. I didn't get the new clothes because I took care of my old ones. I didn't get the tutoring because I studied on my own. I didn't get the comfort because I didn't cry loud enough. Chloe was already scrolling through her phone, probably looking at luxury apartments. She didn't even glance at the box. It's a nice box, Maddie, she said dismissively. Maybe you can use it as a coffee table book or something. Very vintage. I felt a hot, prickling sensation behind my eyes, but I refused to let a single tear fall. Not in front of them, not tonight. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I picked up the heavy wooden box. It was heavier than it looked, the corners sharp against my ribs. Thank you for the pot roast, I said, my voice cold and level. And thank you for the clarity. I think I've seen everything I need to see. Madison, don't be dramatic, my mother called out as I walked toward the door. You're making a scene over some old pictures. You should be happy for your sister. I didn't look back. I walked out into the Portland rain, the box tucked under my arm like a secret I wasn't ready to share. I put it on the passenger seat of my 10-year-old car and sat there for a long time, watching the wipers struggle against the downpour. My parents thought they had given me a burden while they gave Chloe a fortune. They thought they had handed me a pile of dead memories so they could wash their hands of me. But as I pulled out of the driveway, I felt a strange vibration from the box, a weight that suggested there was more to these old photos than my father had ever bothered to check. They had spent 30 years underestimating me, and tonight, they had just handed me the keys to their own undoing. The drive from Portland to Chicago is over 2,000 miles of open road, flat plains, and far too much time to think. I had packed my entire life into the back of my 10-year-old sedan, a few suitcases of clothes, my architecture degree, and that heavy, dusty wooden box. It sat on the passenger seat like a silent, judgmental passenger. Every time I hit a pothole, the brass hinges would rattle, a metallic reminder of the night my father chose a check for my sister and a shoebox of memories for me. As I crossed the state line into Illinois, the wind began to howl, pulling at my steering wheel. I remember looking at that box and feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated resentment. My parents had called me the strong one. They used my resilience as an excuse to bankrupt my future so they could subsidize Chloe's whims. To them, my strength wasn't a virtue to be rewarded. It was a reason to be ignored. I was the cast iron skillet, rugged, reliable, and expected to handle the heat without cracking, while Chloe was the porcelain vase, too fragile to even touch the ground. I found a studio apartment in a part of Chicago that the travel brochures conveniently leave out. It was a third-floor walk-up with peeling gray wallpaper and a radiator that clanked like a ghost in the middle of the night. The air smelled of old grease and industrial cleaner. On my first night, I didn't even have a bed. I slept on the floor with my coat as a blanket, and I placed the box in the corner of the closet. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Looking at those legacy photos felt like looking at the evidence of my own exclusion. It was a burial plot for my childhood. The next 2 years were a blur of caffeine, exhaustion, and the kind of grit that you only find when you have absolutely no safety net. My father had said the world was my trust fund, so I went out and started collecting. My day began at 4:30 a.m. I worked a 4-hour shift at a local diner, pouring coffee for commuters who were just as tired as I was. By 9 a.m., I was in my real job, a junior position at a mid-sized architectural firm. I was the first one in and the last one to leave. I volunteered for every tedious task, every overtime opportunity, and every difficult client that the senior partners didn't want to handle. By 6 p.m., when my colleagues were heading to happy hour, I was heading to my third job. I spent my evenings as a freelance drafter for small contractors, and my weekends tutoring high school students in advanced mathematics. $20 an hour here, $50 a project there. I lived on ramen noodles and discount grocery store bread. I rationed my phone data like it was water in a drought. I remember one winter night, walking home from the train station in a Chicago blizzard because I couldn't justify the $2 for a bus fare. My boots were leaking, my toes were numb, and all I could think about was the $300,000 sitting in Chloe's bank account. She was probably in Bali or Paris, finding herself on my parents' retirement money, while I was literally freezing to prove I could survive. I stopped calling home. I realized very quickly that my mother's phone calls only followed a specific pattern. She wouldn't ask if I was warm enough or if I had made any friends. She would call to tell me how inspired she was by Chloe's latest Instagram post, or to subtly ask if I had any professional advice for Chloe's failing business ventures. "Madison, you're so smart with numbers," my mother would say, her voice breezy and oblivious. "Chloe is trying to open an organic pet boutique, but she's having trouble with the floor plan. Could you just take a quick look? It would mean so much to her." I would grip my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I'm working 2 jobs and a career, Mom. I don't have time to fix Chloe's floor plans for free." "Oh, don't be like that," she'd sigh. "You've always been the independent one. You don't understand how stressful it is for Chloe to follow her dreams. She's sensitive, Madison. Not everyone is as tough as you." Tough, independent, strong. They were compliments that felt like insults. They were the bars of the cage my parents had built for me. Because I was tough, I didn't need a graduation gift. Because I was independent, I didn't need help with my first month's rent. Because I was strong, I didn't need to be loved. One afternoon, I came home after a 16-hour day. I was so tired I felt vibrating. I sat on the floor of my tiny kitchen and stared at the closet door. I thought about that box. Why hadn't I thrown it away? Why was I hauling this dead weight across the country? I got up, walked to the closet, and pulled it out. The wood was cold and rough. I placed my hand on the lid, ready to smash it against the floor, but I stopped. There was a faint scent coming from the wood, a smell of cedar and old tobacco. It was the scent of my grandfather Silas's workshop. Silas was the only one who ever saw me. He used to take me to the hardware store and let me pick out the nails while Chloe stayed inside to play with dolls. He used to say, "Madison, some people are built for the storm, and some people are built for the sunshine. You're the one who builds the house that keeps the sunshine people safe." I didn't open the box that night. I wasn't ready to face Silas's ghost yet, but I didn't throw it away either. I pushed it back under my bed, into the darkness where I kept all the things that hurt too much to look at. I focused on my career instead. I spent my nights studying for my lead certification and my professional license. I became an expert in project management. I learned how to negotiate with contractors who thought they could intimidate a 30-year-old woman. I learned how to read the fine print in contracts that everyone else skimmed over. I was building a life, brick by painful brick. By the end of the 3rd year, the transformation was complete. I wasn't just a girl who survived, I was a woman who was thriving. I had been promoted to project lead. I had moved out of the gray studio and into a beautiful, sun-drenched loft. I had a savings account that was finally in the black. I had proved them right. I had landed on my feet. But what my parents didn't understand is that when you push someone away so hard that they learn to survive without you, you lose the right to call them family. I had become the architect of my own life, and in my blueprints, there was no room for people who only saw me as a cast-iron skillet. The box remained under the bed, gathering dust, waiting for the moment the strong one would finally break and see what was really inside. In the world of family dynamics, there is a phenomenon I call the split screen. It's that surreal experience where you are living one reality, one of grit, sweat, and survival, while watching the people who share your DNA live an entirely different, curated, and subsidized life. For 3 years, my life was a split screen. On the left side was me, Madison, in my Chicago loft, drafting blueprints until my eyes bled and counting every cent. On the right side was Chloe, back in Portland, documented in high definition on Instagram, spending the $300,000 our parents had effectively stolen from my future. I didn't follow Chloe on social media, but I didn't have to. Our mother, Martha, made sure I stayed updated. Every phone call from her was a narrated tour of Chloe's latest triumph. Martha never asked about my architecture license or how I had managed to secure a project for a multi-million-dollar library downtown. No, she wanted to talk about Chloe's collection, the high-end, organic, and sustainable boutique Chloe had opened in the most expensive district in Portland. "She's just such a visionary, Madison," my mother would gush, her voice sounding light and airy, as if she were floating on the clouds of Chloe's perceived success. "She's traveled to Paris for inspiration. She bought the most beautiful velvet sofas for the dressing rooms. You should see the chandelier, it's imported from Italy. She's finally becoming the woman we always knew she could be." I would sit at my desk, looking at a spreadsheet of my own firm's overhead costs, and I would think about that Italian chandelier. I knew what a chandelier like that cost. I knew what the rent in the Pearl District was. I did the math in my head. The math my father, the engineer, should have done but refused to. $300,000 sounds like a lot of money until you start buying Italian chandeliers and taking inspiration trips to Paris. Chloe wasn't building a business, she was building a stage. She was playing the role of a successful entrepreneur, using the script our parents had bought for her. Meanwhile, my side of the screen was colored in shades of gray and blue. I didn't have velvet sofas. I had a second-hand drafting table and a chair that creaked every time I moved. But I had something Chloe didn't. I had the respect of my peers. In my 3rd year in Chicago, I was promoted to senior project manager. It was a role usually reserved for people 10 years older than me. I had earned it because I didn't have a safety net. I couldn't afford to fail, so I became the person who made everyone else's projects succeed. I became the person who caught the errors in the contracts, the person who stayed until midnight to ensure the structural integrity of a design was flawless. I remember the day I closed on my own home. It wasn't a mansion, and it didn't have an Italian chandelier. It was a modest, beautiful townhouse with large windows that let in the Chicago sun. I signed the papers alone. There was no family dinner to celebrate, no check from my father for the down payment. I paid for it with the money I had saved from 3 jobs and 4 years of living on ramen and resolve. When I walked into that empty house for the first time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. I was 31 years old, and I owned a piece of the earth. I had landed on my feet, just like my father said I would. But the irony was, I hadn't landed there because of him. I had landed there in spite of him. As my life stabilized, Chloe's side of the screen began to flicker and crack. The Instagram posts changed. They went from buying my dream inventory to self-care is so important during stressful times. The photos of the boutique were replaced by photos of Chloe at luxury spas or drinking wine on the coast. Then came the phone calls from Aunt Margot, the only one who dared to look behind the velvet curtains. "Madison, it's a mess," Margot whispered one evening. "The boutique hasn't had a customer in weeks. Chloe spends all day in the back room on her phone. She's already gone through the 300,000. Your father, he's been dipping into his own retirement funds to keep the lights on at her shop. He's even co-signed a new business loan for her. $80,000, Madison. And he didn't tell Martha." I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. $80,000? On top of the 300,000? My father was a man of precision, a man who alphabetized his spices. How could he be so blind? But then I realized he wasn't blind, he was invested. He had gambled his legacy on the idea that Chloe was the sensitive one who needed a cushion. To admit she was failing was to admit that his entire philosophy of parenting was a mistake. He couldn't let Chloe fail because if she failed, his judgment failed. A month later, the first cracks appeared in the parents' own lives. My mother called, and for the first time in years, her voice didn't sound airy. It sounded thin, stretched, like a wire that was about to snap. "Madison, honey," she started. The honey, a warning sign of a request. "Your father has been a little stressed lately. He's been forgetting things, small things, like where he put his keys, or which day the trash goes out. And, well, money's a bit tight this month. We were wondering if you could take a look at some documents for us? You're so good with these things." "What kind of documents, Mom?" I asked, my voice flat. "Oh, just some bank stuff, and something about a reverse mortgage. I don't really understand it, but the bank sent a letter. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." A reverse mortgage. My heart sank. They were borrowing against the house they had lived in for 30 years, the house that was supposed to be their safety net. They were hollowing out their own future to fill the bottomless pit of Chloe's dreams. "Why don't you ask Chloe to help?" I said, the bitterness leaking through. "She's the one with the high-end boutique and the Italian chandeliers. Surely she's a business expert by now." Silence. The kind of silence that confirms everything you already suspected. She's going through a lot right now, Madison. She's very fragile. We don't want to worry her." There it was. The porcelain vase was still being protected, even as the house it sat in was crumbling. I was being asked to be the cast iron skillet again. I was being asked to step in and fix the mess, to provide the professional expertise they refused to pay for, all while being kept at arm's length from the family secrets. I looked over at the closet where the wooden box from my father was still kept. I hadn't opened it in 3 years. In that moment, I felt a strange pull toward it. My parents were facing financial ruin, Chloe was a sinking ship, and I was the only one with a solid foundation. Was it possible that the legacy my father handed me wasn't just a pile of photos? I started doing my own investigation. Using the skills I had honed as a project manager, I began digging into the public records of my parents' property and Chloe's business. What I found was a tragedy in 3 acts. Act 1. The $300,000 was gone within 18 months. Act 2. A $80,000 SBA loan, co-signed by my father, was now 4 months in arrears. Act 3. My parents had indeed taken out a reverse mortgage and were currently being hounded by creditors for credit card debt, charges at high-end stores, luxury wine subscriptions, and gym memberships in Chloe's name, all linked to my father's accounts. It was financial exploitation, plain and simple. Chloe was bleeding them dry, and my parents were handing her the knife, because they were too proud to admit they had chosen the wrong daughter to trust. The split screen was merging. My success was a solid, tangible reality, built on the floor of my own townhouse. Their waste was a ghost, a hollow shell of Instagram filters and unpaid bills. I was thriving in the silence they had given me, while they were drowning in the noise of the golden child. I sat in my living room that night, the city of Chicago twinkling outside my window. I realized that the $300K hadn't been a gift to Chloe. It had been a curse. It had robbed her of the need to grow, the need to learn, the need to be strong. By giving her everything, they had left her with nothing. And by giving me nothing, they had inadvertently given me the world. But the final act was yet to come. The phone call that would bring me back to Portland wasn't just about a reverse mortgage. It was about a total collapse. And I knew that when I walked back into that house, I wouldn't be walking in as the daughter they could ignore. I would be walking in as the only person who could read the blueprints of their destruction, and I would be bringing the box. The silence of 3 years was broken on a rainy Thursday in November. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk of my new office, the screen displaying a name I hadn't seen in 1,095 days: Mother. For a long moment, I just watched it. I watched the way the light reflected off the screen, a digital ghost from a past I had worked so hard to outrun. My heart didn't race. It didn't skip a beat. Instead, it felt like a cold stone settling in my chest. I knew this call wasn't an apology. In my family, the golden child got the apologies, and the strong one got the demands. I picked up on the fifth ring. "Hello, Madison speaking." "Madison, honey? Is that you? You sound so professional." My mother's voice crackled through the line. She sounded older, her breath hitching in a way that signaled she was ready to perform. There was no, "How are you?" No, "I've missed you." No, "I'm sorry for the way we left things." "It's me, Mom. What do you need?" I kept my voice flat, the tone I used when a contractor tried to overcharge me for steel beams. "Oh, Madison, it's your father. He's not well. And the house, honey. The bank sent a man today. A man in a suit with a clipboard. They're saying we have 30 days. 30 days to leave the only home we've ever known." She started to sob, the practiced, rhythmic sobbing that had worked on my father for 40 years. "We've spent everything trying to keep Chloe's boutique afloat, and now we have nothing. We need you to come home. We need your help to save the house." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The irony was a bitter pill. They had given Chloe $300,000 to chase rainbows, and now they were asking the daughter they had exiled with a box of old photos to pay the debt. "Where is Chloe?" I asked. "She's the one with the trust fund. She's the visionary. Why isn't she saving the house?" "Madison, don't be cruel," my mother snapped, the mask of grief slipping for a second to reveal the sharp edge of her favoritism. "Chloe is devastated. She's had a complete breakdown. She can't handle this kind of stress. You know how sensitive she is. You, on the other hand, you've always been the rock. You have that big job in the city. You have the money. It's your responsibility as a daughter to help your parents in their hour of need." "My responsibility?" I felt a short, sharp laugh escape my throat. "Mom, you handed me my exit papers 3 years ago in a dusty wooden box. You told me the world was my trust fund. Well, I went out and I earned my world. I don't owe you the equity of my hard work to pay for Chloe's Italian chandeliers." The line went silent for a beat. Then my mother's voice turned cold, a chill that matched the Chicago wind outside my window. "You always were a cold, heartless girl, Madison. So selfish. We raised you, we fed you, and this is how you repay us? By letting your parents become homeless? Your father is sick, and all you care about is your pride." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in the silence of my office, the dial tone a hum of finality. Part of me wanted to block the number and never look back. I had a beautiful life here. I had a house, a career, and peace. But another part of me, the part that had lived for 30 years in that house on Birch Lane, knew that this door wouldn't close until I locked it myself. I didn't go home to save them. I didn't go home to write a check. I went home to witness the end of the story they had started. I took a week of personal leave. I packed a small suitcase, but before I left, I went to the closet and pulled out the wooden box. I hadn't opened it yet, but I felt its weight differently now. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was evidence. I put it on the passenger seat of my car, exactly where it had sat 3 years ago when I fled Portland. The drive back felt like a descent into a dream. The landscape shifted from the flat Midwestern plains back to the misty, evergreen forests of the Pacific Northwest. As I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, my heart sank. The lawn, once my father's pride, was overgrown and choked with weeds. The sage-green paint was peeling, and one of the shutters was hanging by a single screw. The golden child's car, the glacier-white Audi, was nowhere to be seen. Probably repossessed, I thought. I stepped out of the car, the heavy wooden box tucked under my arm. The air smelled of damp cedar and neglect. I didn't knock. I used my old key, and to my surprise, the lock hadn't been changed. They hadn't even bothered to protect what little they had left. The inside of the house was worse. It smelled of stale food and medicine. Boxes were stacked in the hallway, half-packed and poorly taped. My father, Thomas, was sitting in his recliner in the living room, a blanket over his legs. He looked thin, his eyes clouded with a confusion that hurt to look at. He looked at me, but he didn't see Madison, the daughter who had spent her weekends fixing his computer and mowing his lawn. He saw a stranger. "Are you from the bank?" he asked, his voice a gravelly whisper. "No, Dad. It's Madison." My mother walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a tattered apron. She didn't hug me. She didn't smile. She just looked at the box under my arm and then at my face. "You're here," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "I hope you brought your checkbook. The lawyers are coming on Monday, and if we don't have the first $50,000 for the arrears, we're out on the street." I walked over to the dining table, the same mahogany table where they had broken my heart, and set the wooden box down with a heavy thud. "I'm not here to write a check, Mom," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "I'm here because I wanted to see what $300,000 of sensitivity bought this family. And I brought the legacy you gave me. I think it's time we finally see what's inside." Chloe walked down the stairs then, wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her eyes were puffy, her hair unwashed. She looked at me with a mixture of resentment and desperate hope. "Maddie, please," she whispered. "Don't be like this. We're family." "Family?" I repeated the word, letting it hang in the stagnant air of the room. "Family is a two-way street, Chloe, and for 30 years you've been driving a tank over mine." I looked at the three of them, my broken father, my bitter mother, and my spoiled sister. They were waiting for the strong one to save them. They were waiting for the cast-iron skillet to hold the heat one more time. But they didn't realize that a skillet, if left in the fire too long without any care, eventually becomes something else. It becomes a weapon. I reached out and placed my hand on the brass latch of the box. The metal was cold. My mother and sister leaned in, their greed momentarily overriding their pride. They still thought there was nothing in here but old photos. They still thought they had won. "Before I open this," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet house, "I want you to tell me one thing. If the roles were reversed, if I was the one losing my home and Chloe was the one with the money, would you be asking her to save me?" My mother looked away. Chloe studied her fingernails. The silence was the only answer I needed. I flipped the latch, and the sound of it clicking open was the loudest thing I had ever heard in that house. It was the sound of a legacy finally finding its voice. The click of the brass latch sounded like a gunshot in the silent dining room. For 3 years I had carried this box like a burden, a physical manifestation of my family's rejection. Now, as the lid creaked open, the scent of aged cedar and my grandfather Silas's pipe tobacco wafted out, thick and heavy. It was the smell of my childhood, of the only man who had ever looked at me and seen a person instead of a tool. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Madison," my mother Martha snapped, her eyes fixed on the box. "Are we really doing this now? We are facing homelessness. Your father is barely cognizant of where he is, and you want to look at old baby pictures? This is exactly why we say you're cold. You have no sense of priority. My priority is the truth, Mom, I said, my fingers trembling slightly as I reached inside. I began pulling out the photos. They were loose, some yellowed at the edges, others protected in small plastic sleeves. There was a photo of me at age 5, trying to lift a heavy bucket of nails in Silas's workshop. There was another of Chloe, dressed in a pristine white lace dress, sitting on a velvet chair while everyone fawned over her. The contrast was so sharp it made my chest ache. Even in the legacy box, the story was the same: the worker and the ornament. Chloe leaned over, her silk robe rustling. She reached out to grab a handful of photos, but I swatted her hand away. Don't touch them, Chloe. You didn't want the box when it was offered. You wanted the cash. You don't get to look through the memories now. I was just looking, Chloe huffed, crossing her arms. Besides, what's even the point? It's just junk. Dad gave you that box to keep you busy because he knew you'd spend the rest of your life organizing it while I went out and did something important. And what did you do that was so important, Chloe? I asked, not looking up. Did you spend all $300,000 on importance? Because according to the bank, you've spent this entire family into a hole you can't climb out of. I was building a brand, she shrieked. It's not my fault the market shifted. It's not my fault people don't appreciate quality anymore. I ignored her. I was looking at a specific photo, a large, framed portrait of Grandfather Silas sitting at his old drafting table. It was the same table I now used in my office in Chicago. I noticed something strange about the back of the frame. As an architect, I'm trained to notice when things don't fit quite right. The backing of the frame was slightly too thick. There was a gap, a fractional space that shouldn't have been there. I turned the frame over and felt along the edges. My mother sighed loudly, a sound of pure exasperation. Madison, stop playing with the pictures and listen to me. We need $50,000 by Monday. If you have any heart left in that independent chest of yours, you will go to the bank tomorrow and… Snap. I had found the release, a small, hidden wooden peg on the side of the frame. I pressed it, and the back of the frame popped open. A thick, cream-colored envelope slid out and landed on the mahogany table. The room went absolutely still. Even my father, Thomas, seemed to focus for a moment, his eyes drifting toward the envelope. My mother's jaw dropped. Chloe's eyes widened, the greed returning to her face with a speed that was almost nauseating. "What is that?" Martha whispered, reaching for the envelope. I pulled it back, holding it against my chest. It's addressed to me. For Madison, the architect of her own future. My hands were shaking as I broke the wax seal. Inside were several documents, but the first thing I pulled out was a letter, written in Silas's shaky but precise engineering script. I read it aloud, my voice thick with emotion. My dearest Madison, if you are reading this, it means you have finally opened the box I told your father to give you. I knew him well enough to know he would choose the sensitive daughter for the cash and the strong one for the junk. He never understood that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. I paused, looking at my parents. Thomas looked away, but Martha's face was a mask of shock. I spent my life building a fortune that your father and Martha never knew the true extent of. They saw the rental properties and the small savings, but they never saw the land I bought in downtown Portland when it was nothing but dirt and dreams. Nor did they see the stock I purchased in a small company called Fruit, back when everyone thought computers were just for scientists. I am leaving the deed to that land and the original stock certificates in this hidden compartment. But there is a condition, one that is legally binding in the trust I have established with my attorneys. Chloe was leaning so far over the table she was practically on top of me. What condition? Madison, read it. What does it say? I continued, my voice gaining strength. These assets are to remain in a controlled trust for Madison alone until the age of 30. If at any point the other members of the family attempt to seize or manipulate these assets, the entire estate is to be donated to the Oregon Veterans Education Fund. I left Chloe and your parents enough to live comfortably, provided they were wise. If they weren't, well, I suspect you will be the only one standing with a foundation under your feet. I pulled out the other documents. There was a deed for 3 prime acres in downtown Portland, land that was now worth millions. And beneath that, original stock certificates for a tech giant that had split so many times since 1985 that the value was astronomical. Millions, Chloe whispered, her voice a mix of awe and horror. That box is worth millions? And you've had it in your closet this whole time? No, Chloe, I said, looking her in the eye. I've had it in my closet for 3 years. Dad gave it to me on the same night he gave you $300,000. He told me the world was my trust fund, remember? He told me I was independent and strong and didn't need help. Madison, honey, my mother said, her voice suddenly sweet, dripping with a fake warmth that made my skin crawl. This is wonderful news. This is a miracle. We can pay off the mortgage. We can save Chloe's boutique. We can get your father the best care in the world. Silas was always so clever. He knew you'd take care of us. Silas knew you'd fail me, Mom, I said, my voice cold as ice. That's why he hid it. He knew that if he gave me the money openly, you would have found a way to give it to Chloe. He knew you would have guilted me into sharing until I had nothing left, just like you're trying to do right now. But we're your parents, Martha cried, her voice rising to that familiar screech. We raised you. We gave you everything. You gave me a suitcase and a box of photos, Mom. You gave Chloe the future. Well, as it turns out, Grandfather Silas gave me the real future. And according to this trust document, none of you have any legal claim to a single penny of it. Chloe stood up, her face twisted in rage. This isn't fair. Grandpa was old. He wasn't in his right mind. He was manipulated by you. You were always his favorite, sneaking off to that workshop. I'm going to contest this. I'm going to sue you for my half. I didn't even blink. I reached back into the box and pulled out one final piece of paper, a notarized competency certificate from Silas's doctor, dated the same day as the letter. He was an engineer, Chloe. He planned for people like you. He knew exactly what you would try to do, and he made sure that if you even tried to sue me, the trust would immediately dissolve and go to charity. So go ahead. Sue me. You'll just ensure that nobody gets anything. Chloe sank back into her chair, her face pale. My mother started to sob, but this time I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. I looked at my father, who was staring at the stock certificates with a look of profound realization. You chose the wrong daughter, Dad, I said quietly. You gambled on the porcelain vase, and you broke the cast iron skillet. But the thing about cast iron is that it's nearly impossible to destroy. You thought you were throwing me away, but you were actually handing me the keys to the kingdom. I began carefully putting the documents back into the envelope. The room felt different now. The neglect of the house, the smell of failure, the weight of the debt. It was all still there, but it didn't belong to me anymore. I was standing in the middle of their ruins, but I was the only one with a blueprint for a new life. I'm going to my hotel now, I said, standing up and tucking the box under my arm. I have a lot to discuss with my legal team in the morning. Madison, please, my mother called out as I walked toward the door. Where are you going? We're your family. You can't just leave us like this. I stopped at the front door, the same door I had walked through 3 years ago with a heavy heart and a dusty box. I looked back at the house, the peeling paint, the sagging porch, the ghosts of the girl they had ignored. I'm not leaving you, Mom. You left me a long time ago. I'm just finally moving into the future Silas built for me, the one you thought wasn't worth a single cent. I walked out into the night, the weight of the box feeling lighter than it ever had. They didn't realize what was hidden inside the box, but more importantly, they never realized what was hidden inside of me. The silence that followed my Grandpa Silas's letter was so thick you could have carved it with a knife. For a few seconds, the only sound was the rhythmic tapping of the rain against the window, the same rain that had witnessed my exile 3 years ago. I stood at the head of the mahogany table, the stock certificates and the land deeds spread out before me like a map of a life my parents had tried to deny me. I felt a strange, cold clarity. In my professional life as an architect, I deal with structures. I know when a foundation is solid and when it is built on sand. My family's foundation had just collapsed, and they were still trying to grab the debris. "Give me those." My mother, Martha, suddenly lunged across the table, her hand clawing for the stock certificates. "Those belong to your father. Silas was his father, not yours. This is an inheritance for the head of the household." I didn't flinch. I simply moved the envelope 6 inches to the left, out of her reach. My years of dealing with aggressive contractors and high-stakes board meetings had taught me one thing. The person who loses their temper is the person who has already lost the argument. "Sit down, Mom," I said, my voice as level as a laser line. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Madison, you can't be serious," Chloe shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that probably set off the neighbor's dogs. "That's millions of dollars. Millions! Do you have any idea what I could do with that? My boutique. I could reopen in the Pearl District. I could hire a real PR firm. You already have a career. You have a house in Chicago. You don't need this. It's only fair that we split it 3 ways. Actually, I should get more because I'm the one who stayed here and cared for Mom and Dad while you were busy being independent." I looked at Chloe. I looked at the silk robe, the expensive highlights in her hair, and the desperate, naked greed in her eyes. "You didn't care for them, Chloe. You bled them dry. You watched Dad sign a reverse mortgage so you could buy iced lattes and Italian chandeliers. You didn't stay to help. You stayed to harvest whatever was left of their retirement." My father, Thomas, finally spoke. His voice was a rasp, a shadow of the man who used to command the dinner table with engineering precision. "Madison, Silas. He wasn't in his right mind at the end. He was old. He was confused. A trust like that. It can't be legal. I'm the next of kin. I'm the executor of his primary estate." This was the moment, the legal showdown that my sources had prepared me for. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a second blue folder. While I am an architect and not a JAG officer like the women in some of the stories I've heard, I am a woman who believes in documentation. Before I had even set foot on a plane to Portland, I had spent 48 hours with my legal team in Chicago. I had sent them digital scans of the trust documents Silas had sent me in a separate private mailer years ago, a backup he had arranged through his own attorney. "Let's talk about legality, Dad," I said, opening the folder. "You're right. You are the executor of the primary estate, which consists of this house, the cars, and the empty bank accounts you've drained for Chloe. But this?" I gestured to the box. "This is the Silas Palmer Heritage Trust. It was established as an irrevocable trust 10 years ago. It is a separate legal entity. It never entered your probate process because it was never yours." I pulled out a document with a gold seal. "This is the anti-contest clause. Silas was an engineer, Dad. He knew how to build a fail-safe. If any member of this family, you, Mom, or Chloe, attempts to challenge this trust in a court of law, the entire asset pool is immediately liquidated and transferred to the Oregon Veterans Education Fund. Not a penny goes to me, and certainly not a penny goes to you." Silas made sure that the only way for this money to stay in the family was if it stayed with me. He gave you the choice to be fair. You chose the $300,000 for Chloe. You finalized the deal the night you handed me this box. Martha's face turned a shade of white that matched the peeling paint on the walls. "But we're your parents. You're going to let us lose the house? You're going to let the bank take the roof over our heads while you sit on millions of dollars in tech stock?" You lost the house the day you co-signed for Chloe's second failed business loan, I countered. You lost the house when you decided that one daughter was a porcelain vase to be protected and the other was a cast iron skillet to be used. I didn't take your house, Mom. Your favoritism did. Chloe was crying now, real, ugly tears of frustration. You're so heartless, Madison. You've always been jealous of me. Just because Mom and Dad love me more, you're punishing us. I stood up, the weight of the last 3 years finally lifting. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt nothing. And that was the most powerful thing of all. I'm not jealous, Chloe. I'm the one who survived. I'm the one who worked 3 jobs in a Chicago winter while you were posting selfies in Bali. I'm the one who built a life out of nothing while you were turning a fortune into debt. You call me heartless? I'm the one who came back. I'm the one who sat here and listened to you beg for money before I even mentioned what was in the box. I gave you a chance to be a family, and all you did was ask for my checkbook. I turned to my father. Dad, I've already spoken to the bank holding the reverse mortgage. They were very interested to know that there was an undisclosed trust involved in the family history. I've arranged for a stay of eviction for 60 days. I'm going to buy this house from the bank. Not for you, but for the trust. You can live here, but you will not own it. You will be tenants. And the golden child? I looked at Chloe. She has 24 hours to move out. If she wants a luxury lifestyle, she can go out and earn it, just like I did. You can't kick her out, Martha screamed. She has nowhere to go. She has an Audi, I said, picking up the wooden box. She has Italian chandeliers. Maybe she can sell them. Or maybe she can take her sensitivity and find someone else to subsidize it. But the bank is closed, Mom. The strong one is done carrying the load. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The floor my father had sanded, the floor that was now legally under my protection. I felt like the protagonist in those stories who finally stands up in the courtroom and reveals the truth. I didn't need a judge to gavel. The silence in that room was my verdict. Madison, my father called out, his voice small and trembling. Wait, please. I stopped at the door, but I didn't turn around. What, Dad? Do you want to tell me about tire pressure? Or how I'm so independent I don't need a hug? I should have checked the box, he whispered. I should have looked inside. No, Dad, I said, my hand on the doorknob. You should have looked at me. If you had, you would have realized that the most valuable thing Silas left you wasn't in the box. It was standing right in front of you. But you were too busy looking for a way to save Chloe to notice that you were losing me. I stepped out into the night. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet earth and fresh beginnings. I put the wooden box on the passenger seat of my car and sat there for a moment, breathing in the quiet. The legal showdown was over. The structure of my old life had been demolished, just like my sources suggested. But as I looked at the house in the rearview mirror, the sagging porch and the dim lights, I didn't feel sad. I felt like an architect who had just cleared a site of a rotted building. Now I could finally start building something that was actually meant to last. I had the deed, I had the stock, and for the first time in 32 years, I had the only thing that truly mattered. I had my own respect. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal documents, bank transfers, and a silence in my childhood home that felt heavier than the rain outside. By Monday morning, the Silas Palmer Heritage Trust was no longer a hidden secret in a dusty box. It was a living, breathing legal fortress. I sat in the office of my grandfather's original attorney, a man who had been waiting years for this specific phone call, and watched him stamp the final papers. The house on Birch Lane was now officially property of the trust. My parents were no longer owners, they were tenants, allowed to live there only as long as they followed the strict financial boundaries I had set. Chloe didn't go quietly. She spent the first 24 hours screaming about fairness, throwing her designer shoes into suitcases, and calling every relative who would listen. But as the news of the trust's anti-contest clause spread, the sympathetic ears she once relied on began to close. Aunt Margot was the first to tell her the truth. You had $300,000, Chloe. Madison had a box of photos. If you want to talk about fairness, start there. When Chloe finally walked out the door, she didn't look like a porcelain vase anymore. She looked like a woman who had never been told no and was now finding out that the world didn't owe her a cushion. My mother stood on the porch, crying those familiar performative tears, but my father just stood there, looking at the ground. He didn't offer Chloe his car. He didn't slide another check into her hand. He finally realized that every time he had saved her, he had actually been making her weaker. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I drove back to the 3 acres in downtown Portland that Grandpa Silas had left for me. I stood in the center of that overgrown, valuable dirt and looked at the city skyline. This land was worth more than the $300,000 Chloe blew in 18 months. But as I stood there, I realized it wasn't the value of the land that mattered most. It was the fact that Silas had seen the architect in me when I was just a girl in pigtails holding a bucket of nails. He knew that I wouldn't just spend the money, I would build something with it. I've decided that my first major project as a senior architect won't be a library or a museum. It will be the Silas Palmer Community Center, built right on this land. It will be a place for kids who feel overlooked, for the strong ones who are tired of carrying the weight, and for anyone who has ever been told that their worth is less than a golden child. As for my parents, I provide them with a monthly allowance from the trust, enough for their medication, their groceries, and a modest lifestyle. But the credit cards are gone, the reverse mortgage has been halted, and most importantly, the power they once held over my emotions has been revoked. I answer my mother's calls once a week, but I don't listen to the guilt trips anymore. I am the architect of my own life now, and I've learned that the most important structure you ever build is the boundary that protects your peace. Looking back at that night 3 years ago, I realized that my father was right about one thing. He said the world was my trust fund. What he didn't understand was that the world doesn't just hand you a fortune, it gives you the tools to earn one. He thought he was giving me a box of dead memories so he could wash his hands of me. Instead, he handed me the blueprints to my own greatness. Grandfather Silas used to say that the quietest person in the room is usually the one who knows the most. For 32 years, I was that quiet person. I watched, I worked, and I waited. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I didn't need a $300,000 head start to win. I just needed the truth and the strength to stand up when everyone else expected me to stay down. If you are listening to this and you feel like the strong one in your family, if you feel like the person everyone calls when they need something, but nobody calls when they have good news, I want you to remember my story. Your independence is not a reason for people to love you less. Your resilience is not a license for people to use you. And sometimes, the very thing people give you to hold you back is exactly what you need to move forward. Don't be afraid to open your own box. You might find that the people who underestimated you have actually handed you the keys to a future they aren't invited to. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. This story is for everyone who has ever built a life out of a suitcase or a dusty wooden box. If this resonated with you, please drop a comment below and share your own experience with family dynamics. It helps us grow this community of quiet strength. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon. We have many more stories about standing your ground, setting hard boundaries, and finding your voice. I'm Madison, and I'm finally home, not because of the house I was given, but because of the person I became. I'll see you in the next story.